Good morning, Grace, and good morning to whoever watches our reading corner
Good
later.
morning.
I thoroughly enjoyed your time last time with your story and with making the headbands, and I hope you'll do some more of that with us and for us all.
Yeah.
So today, the author and the stories that I chose to read are by Rudyard Kipling, and one of my favorite ones was his Just So stories. And I actually don't know too much about him, so before I'm going to do a story, I look up the author and find out a little bit more about him. Actually, he was born in India of English parents back in the late 1800s. And of course, it was the parents felt when he was like 5 or 6, he should go to an English school in England, which he hated. He came back to India and spent some time, and then sort of was back and forth between the two. Ended up going, interesting enough, at one point to the United States, to a place called Brattleboro, Vermont, which is only 45 minutes from my place in New Hampshire that he was living. And Brattleboro is actually known for where some very great authors went to stay on retreat, to spend time writing and sharing together in kind of a commune. And it's still there. It's still there now. So the story that I'm going to read now, and the other thing that I found was interesting was the reason they were called Just So Stories was on his last trip back to the United States on a ship, both he and his daughter got very, very ill, his daughter Josephine. And he survived, but she didn't, and she died. And it was one of the things that, and why he always hated America and the United States after that, was from having lost his daughter on the trip. But he used to tell her these stories, and she would come and say, "Daddy, tell me the story of," and tell it just like always, tell it just so. And so that's why he ended up naming the book Just So Stories, after for his daughter Josephine. So, Just So Stories. So my question to the reading room was, do you know how the elephant got his trunk? And this is how Kipling says he got his trunk. In high and far off times, the elephant, oh best beloved, had no trunk. He had only a blackish, bulgy nose, as big as a boot, that he could wiggle about from side to side, but he couldn't pick anything up. He couldn't pick up things with it. But there was one elephant, a new elephant, an elephant's child, who was full of satiable curiosity. And that means he asked ever so many questions. And he lived in Africa. And he filled all Africa up with insatiable questions and curiosity. He asked his tall aunt, the ostrich, why her tail feathers grew just so. And his tall aunt, the ostrich, spanked him hard, hard with her claw. He asked his tall uncle, the giraffe, what made his skin spotty, and his tall uncle, the giraffe, spanked him with his hard, hard hoof. And still he was full of satiable curiosity. He asked his broad aunt, the hippopotamus, why her eyes were red. And his broad aunt, the hippopotamus, spanked him with her broad, broad hoof. And he asked his hairy uncle, the baboon, why melons tasted just so. And his hairy uncle, the baboon, spanked him with his hairy, hairy paw. And still he was full of satiable curiosity. He asked questions about everything that he saw or heard or felt or smelt. or touched, and all his uncles and aunts spanked him. And still, he was filled with curiosity. One fine morning in the middle of a procession of the equinoxes, the satiable elephant child asked a few new fine questions that he had never asked before. He asked, "What does the crocodile have for dinner?" Then everybody said, "Shh," in a loud and different tone, and they spanked him immediately and directly, without stopping for a long time. By and by, when that was finished, he came upon a bird sitting in the middle of a wait-a-bit thorn bush, and he said, "My father has spanked me, and my mother has spanked me. All my aunts and uncles have spanked me for my curiosity, and still I want to know what the crocodile has for dinner." The bird said, with a mournful cry, "Go to the banks of the great green, gray, greasy Limpopo River and set about with fever trees and find out." The very next morning, when there was nothing left of the equinoxes, because the procession had proceeded accordingly, this curious elephant child took 100 pounds of bananas, 100 pounds of sugar cane, the long pearly kind, and 17 melons, the green crackly kind, and said to all his dear family, "Goodbye. I am going to the great gray, green, greasy Limpopo River," all set about with fever trees to find out what the crocodile has for dinner. And they all spanked him once more for good luck, though he asked them most politely to stop. Then he went away, a little warm, but not at all astonished, eating melons and throwing the rind about because he couldn't pick it up. He went from Grahamstown to Kimberley, and from Kimberley to Canham's County, and from Canham's County he went east by north, eating melons all the time, till at last he came to the banks of the great gray, green, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees, precisely as the bird had said. Now, you must know and understand, O best beloved, that till that very week, and day, and hour, and minute, the satiable elephant's child had never seen a crocodile and did not know what one looked like. It was all his curiosity. The first thing that he found was a bio-colored python rock snake curled up around a rock. "Excuse me," said the elephant child, most politely, "but have you seen such a thing as a crocodile in these premises?" "Have I seen a crocodile?" said the bicolored python rock snake in a voice of deepful scorn. What will you ask me next?" "Excuse me," said the elephant child, "but could you kindly tell me, what does one have for dinner?" Then the bicolored python rock snake uncurled himself very quickly from the rock and spanked the elephant's child with his scalesome, flailsome tail. "That is odd," said the elephant child, "because my mother and my father and my uncle and my aunt, not to mention my other aunt, the hippopotamus, and my other uncle, the baboon, have all spanked me for my curiosity. And I suppose this is the same thing." So he said goodbye very politely to the bicolored python rock snake, and helped to coil him up again on the rock, and went on, a little warm, but not at all astonished, eating melons and throwing rind about, because he couldn't pick it up, till he trotted on what he thought was a log at the very edge of the great gray, green, greasy Limpopo River, all set about with fever trees. But it really was the crocodile, O best beloved. And the crocodile winked one eye like this. "Excuse me," said the elephant child most politely, "but do you happen to have seen a crocodile in these parts?" Then the crocodile winked another eye and lifted half his tail out of the mud. And the elephant's child stepped back most politely because he did not wish to be spanked again. "Come hither, little one," said the crocodile. "Why do you ask such things?" "Excuse me," said the elephant child most politely, "but my father has spanked me, my mother has spanked me, not to mention all of my uncles and my aunts and the tall uncle the giraffe who kicked me ever so hard, as well as the broad aunt hippopotamus. They all spanked me, um, and bicolored python rock snake with his tail just up the bank, who spanked me harder than any of them. And so, if it's quite all the same to you, I don't really want to be spanked anymore." "Come hither, little one," said the crocodile, "for I am the crocodile." And he wept crocodile tears to show that it was quite true. Then the elephant's child grew all breathless and panted and kneeled down on the bank and said, "You are the very person I have been looking for all these long days. Will you please tell me what you have for dinner?" "Come hither, little one," said the crocodile, "and I will whisper." Then the elephant's child put his head down close to the crocodile's musky, tusky mouth. And the crocodile, caught by his little nose, which up to that was a very weak day, hour, and minute, had never no bigger than longer than a boot, though much more useful. "I think," said the crocodile, and he said it between his teeth like this, "I think today I will begin with an elephant's child." At this, O beloved, the elephant's child was much annoyed, and he said, speaking through his noise like this, "Let go! You're hurting me!" Then the bicolored python rock snake scuffed down from the bank and said, "My young friend, if you do not know now, immediately and instantly, pull as hard as ever you can. It is my opinion that your acquaintance in the large pattern leathered Eustace, and by this he meant the crocodile, will jerk you yonder into the stream before you can say Jack Robinson." This is the way bicolored python rock snake always talked. Then the elephant's child sat back on his little haunches and he pulled, and he pulled, and he pulled, and his neck, and his nose began to stretch, and the crocodile floundered into the water, making it all creamy, and great sweeps of his tail, and he pulled, and he pulled, and he pulled, and the elephant's child's nose kept on stretching and stretching, and the elephant's child spread his little four legs, and he pulled, and he pulled, and pulled, and his nose kept on stretching, and the crocodile thrashed his tail like an oar, and he pulled, and at each pulled the elephant's child, the nose grew longer and longer, and it hurt him. Then the elephant's child felt his leg slipping, and he said through his nose, which was now nearly 5 feet long, "This is too much for me." Then the bicolored python rock snake came down from the bank, knotted himself in a double clover hitch around elephant child's hind legs, and he said, "Rash and inexperienced traveler, we will now seriously devote ourselves to a little high tension, because if we do not, it is my impression that yonder self-propelling man of war with the armor-plated upper deck," by this, of course, beloved, he meant the crocodile, will prematurely violate your future career. That is the way all bicolored python rock snakes always talk. And so he pulled, and the elephant's child pulled, and the crocodile pulled. But the elephant's child and the bicolored python rock snake pulled harder, and at last the crocodile let go of the elephant's child nose, and with a plop that you could hear all the way down the Limpopo. But the elephant's child sat down most hard and sudden. First, he was careful to say thank you to the bicolored python rock snake. And next, he was kind to his poor nose and wrapped it all up in a cool banana leaves and hung it on a great green, gray, greasy Limpopo to cool. "What are you doing that for?" said the bicolored python rock snake. "Excuse me," said the elephant's child, "but my nose is badly out of shape, and I'm waiting for it to shrink." "Then you will have to wait a long time," said the bicolored python rock snake. "Some people do not know what is good for them." The elephant's child sat there for 3 days waiting for his nose to shrink. But it never grew any shorter, and besides, it made him squint. For, oh best beloved, you will see and understand that the crocodile had pulled it out into a really, truly trunk, same as all of the elephants as they have today. And this is a picture of the elephant child in the trunk. Kipling drew his own pictures, which is kind of interesting. He was his own artist, and he says, At the end of the 3rd day, a fly came and stung him on his shoulder, and before he knew what he was doing, he lifted his trunk and hit that fly dead with the end of it. "Vantage number 1, said bicolored python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere smear nose. Try and eat a little." Before he thought what he was doing, the elephant's child put out his trunk and plucked a large bundle of grass, dusting it against his forelegs and then stuffing it into his own mouth. "Vantage number 2, said the bicolored python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere smear nose. Don't you think the sun is very hot here?" "It is," said elephant's child. And before he thought what he was doing, he scooped up a bunch of mud from the banks of the great green, gray, greasy Limpopo and slapped it on his head, where it made a cool, sloshy mud cap that trickled down behind his ears. "Vantage number 3, said the bicolored python rock snake. "You couldn't have done that with a mere smear nose. Now, how do you feel about being spanked again?" "Excuse me," said the elephant child, "but I shouldn't like that at all." How would you like to spank somebody?" said the bicolored python rock snake. "I should like that very much indeed," said the elephant's child. "Well," said the bicolored python rock snake, "you will find that your new nose of yours will be very useful for spanking people." "Well, thank you," said the elephant's child. "I'll remember that. And now I think I'll go home to all my dear friends and try." So the elephant's child went home across Africa, frisking and whisking with his trunk. And when he wanted fruit to eat, he pulled fruit down from the tree, instead of waiting for it to fall as he used to. And when he wanted grass, he plucked grass up from the ground, instead of going on his knees as he used to. And when flies bit him, he broke off a branch of a tree and used it as a fly whisk, and he made himself a new, cool, sloshy, squishy mudcap whenever the sun was hot. When he felt lonely walking through Africa, he sang to himself down his trunk, and the noise was louder than several brass bands. He went especially out of his way to find Broad Hippopotamus. She was no problem of his, and he spanked her very hard to make sure that the bicolored python snake had spoken the truth about his new trunk. The rest of the time he picked up melon rinds, and he dropped them on his way to the as he had dropped them on the way to the Limpopo River, for he was a very tidy pachyderm. One dark evening, he came back to all of his dear family, and he coiled his trunk, and he said, "How do you do?" They were very glad to see him and immediately said, "Come here and be spanked for your satiable curiosity." "Pooh," said the elephant's child. "I don't think you people know anything about spanking, but I do, and I'll show you." Then he uncurled his trunk and knocked two of his dear brothers head over heels. "Oh, bananas," they said, "where did you learn that trick? And what have you done to your nose?" "I got a new one from the crocodile on the banks of the great gray-green, greasy Limpopo River," said the elephant's child. "I asked him what he had for dinner, and he gave me this to keep." "Looks very ugly," said the hairy uncle, the baboon. "It does," said the elephant's child, "but it's very useful." And he picked up his hairy uncle, the baboon, with one hairy leg and heaved him off into a hornet's nest. Then the bad elephant's child spanked all his dear friends for a long time, till they were very warm and very astonished. He pulled out his tall ostrich aunt's tail feathers. He caught his tall uncle, the giraffe, by the hind leg and dragged him through a thorn bush. He shouted at his broad aunt, the hippopotamus, and blew bubbles into her ears when she was sleeping in the water after meals. But he never let anyone touch the kolokoko bird. At last, things grew so excited that his dear family went off one by one in a hurry to go to the great gray-green, greasy Limpopo River. All set about with fever trees to borrow new noses from the crocodile. When they came back, nobody spanked anybody anymore. And ever since that day, O best beloved, all the elephants you will ever see, beside all those that you won't, have trunks, precisely like the trunk that the satiable elephant's child had. And this is another drawing that he had done of the elephant taking the banana leaves off the tree. And he writes about this particular drawing. "This is just a picture of the elephant's child going to pull bananas off a banana tree after he had got his fine new trunk. I don't think it is a very nice picture, but I couldn't make it any better because elephants and bananas are hard to draw. The streaky things behind the elephant's child mean scruggly marsh country somewhere in Africa. The elephant's child made most of his mud cakes out of the mud that he found there. I think it would be better if you painted the banana tree green and the elephant child red." This is comments on his picture. But I think he did a pretty good job doing his drawings, and certainly much better than I could be doing. So let's just talk a little bit about the elephant's child. And I'm going to unmute everybody so that you can comment on what you thought of the story. If you'd ever heard the story before, if you know of Kipling. I know Africa has many elephants. I saw many when I was traveling in Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what did you think of the story of the elephant's child and how he got his trunk?
Well, for me, the story is very nice, and it also gives a moral lesson on why the elephant has a trunk. So,
Isn't
and
it isn't it interesting that every time he asked a question, because he was so curious, what was the reaction that everybody had? Everybody ended up spanking him because he was curious and asking questions.
Mhm.
Isn't that interesting?
Not good.
Nigel?
Not good. People want to be encouraged to ask questions.
They should be.
Can you hear me?
So
I'm
is spanking them a way for encouraging?
not a good way, no.
No, no. But don't so many of the parents either ignore or spank the kids for asking questions? They don't want to be asked questions.
Yeah, they say, shut up, shut up,
Shut up, shut up.
shut up.
There was
Stop saying
there was
why.
a very funny
Mhm.
video I saw, and she would say to her children when they were young is, "Don't be smart," remember? "Don't be smart. Don't wise up. Don't be smart." And then she says, and then he got older, and he didn't get smart. So we do say things, and we do ignore very often. Oftentimes our own curiosities, but certainly the curiosities of our children, which is what really motivates them to learn those things so important to them that will solve the problems that exist before us. So in a sense, even though we're all sort of separated through the pandemic, the kids are separated from a learning environment where they're only being told what to learn. And it would be nice if we could turn it around in an opportunity for them to begin to start asking questions, to learn and find out more about what it is they want to learn about. Not necessarily that so they could go back and spank everybody else, but so that they could go back and share what it is they're learning to make it better for everybody else. And that's the elephant's child. So that is the end of my story. Do you have any other comments about the story, or I'm going to stop our reading club for today, and we can go on from there. What do you think? Okay.
When's your next one?
My next one's Friday. I have it Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or I try to. And if there's somebody that wants to do it on Friday or one of the other days, you just have to let me know. I'm hoping other people like Grace will read some of their favorite stories and talk about them too.
Yeah. Emma said she was interested to read, I think. And how long have you got now?
I'm actually going to say, since that's good information in the video for people to know.
You need a break, I think.
Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we have my reading corner. And actually, somebody asked if we could move it up to 8 o'clock in the morning instead of 9 o'clock, or if we could move it up to 9 instead of 10 o'clock. Is that a better time for people or not a better time for people? If it was an hour earlier.
3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the afternoon here.
Yeah, but right now I have it at 10
not
o'clock.
much difference here.
I have it at 10 o'clock every day, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Somebody had asked if I could move it to 9. I don't know if it makes it better for my people in the other countries or not. So I'm going to really let you all guide me into whether I change the time of the reading corner, because I don't want to change it unless everybody's on board with it. So with that, I'm going to just say goodbye to those in my reading corner and stop the recording.